Welcome friends to another r/maliciouscompliance video. If you could take a second to hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, it would do more than you can imagine. That said, our first story of the day is by CG Trumpet. Make me come in even though I'm sick? Well, okay then. I hope I don't have a fever. A few years ago, I worked as a seasonal worker, unloading trucks and stocking shelves. I was good at my job, but my boss thought I was the worst employee ever. He had a bone to pick with me specifically and nobody else. Even though there were people who did worse jobs than me, I was always the one that got the criticism. Eventually, I caught some bug. I woke up one day unable to talk. It was laryngitis. I texted my boss telling him I couldn't come in. He told me I had to come in anyways. I reiterated that I was sick and it could be contagious, but he didn't care. So I looked up if laryngitis was contagious. Laryngitis is normally caused by a bacterial infection. This bacteria is only spread if you have a fever. Checks body temperature, 97.4 degrees. So I went to work. It was actually kind of nice not being able to talk. Nobody bothered me. I unloaded the truck and stocked my shelves. They looked as good as they ever did. When I got home, I checked my temp again, 97.4 degrees. And the same thing the next day, 97.4 before work. I did my unloading and stocking. Towards the middle of my shift, I was feeling kinda feverish. I texted my boss saying I should go home. A couple minutes later, he walks up to me and says, "You're not going home until you finish stocking." So I finish stocking and go home, 98.1 degrees, and I go to work again the next day, still unable to talk, 97.8 before, 97.4 after. After that, I wasn't scheduled for 2 days. Go back to work after that feeling normal. I can talk again. Get to work, and my boss isn't there. Apparently, he has laryngitis. See, I think the thing that bothers me the most, not even necessarily the boss catching laryngitis and being like a, well, you asked for it kind of thing, but OP said they work stocking shelves and unloading trucks. They're in direct contact with things that a lot of random strangers are going to come in and pick up. That said, if you had a boss that made you come in when you were feeling sick, and you find out they catch it from you, would you want to text them yourselves and say, "But you have to come in"? Kind of rib them or tease them a little bit? Or is that not very smart poking the bear? Let me know what you would do in the comments down below. Our next story is by CrackSnap7. You want the exact amount? You get the exact amount. When I was 13 or 14, I decided I wanted a PS3. My dad refused to buy me one, but my uncle made me an offer I couldn't refuse. He said that if I worked at his sweet shops for the 2 months of summer break, he would buy me a PS3 and some games in lieu of payment. For teenage me with no commitments, this seemed fantastic. My uncle sold a kind of specialty snack known as a mini samosa in his shop. They're like samosas, but smaller, about 3.5 to 4 centimeters in size. About 1/2286th of a football field for my American friends. They were sold by weight, in sealed packs of 250 grams and 500 grams, as these were the most common amounts people bought. Making those packages turned out to be my job. You see, sometime between now and when Uncle started his business, he realized that 250 grams was roughly the weight of 28 mini samosas, and thus 56 were 500 grams. So instead of weighing each packet, I was told to just pack by counting individual items, which was easier and saved time. We also sold them individually for people who wanted larger, smaller, or unusual amounts. This was also around the time when our government started airing customer awareness PSAs. Basically, just telling customers to be aware of fraudulent business people. This is relevant. So one particularly hot afternoon, it was just me and my uncle at the shop. In India, frequent power cuts were very common during summers, and thus there were no fans or AC running. Both tempers and temperatures were running high at the shop that day. It was then that the villain of our story, Mr. Karen, made his entry. He was a local resident and a regular. He seemed angry from the onset when he barged into the shop. He took a look at the fans and saw that they weren't running, then angrily picked up a 500-gram pack of samosas and asked, "How many samosas are in this thing?" "That's 500 grams, I said. "I said how many, not how much," Mr. Karen literally screamed. "Again, how many in this?" 56, I replied immediately since, I packed them. "How can you be so sure? You didn't even count. You're trying to cheat me." Mr. Karen was now in full-scale Karen mode. "I demand you pack me 500 grams of those individual ones, and don't you dare cheat me again." I look over at my uncle, wet with sweat, fanning himself with yesterday's newspaper. He slowly nodded. I beamed a huge smile and said, "Sure, sir, whatever you want." So I took a bag, picked up some samosas, and started putting them on the balance. I kept counting samosas as I put them in until they were a little over 500 grams. Then I removed the last samosa and the weight fell below 500. Now, keeping eye contact with Mr. Karen, I crushed the samosa and started putting its powdery remains in the bag until it was exactly 500 grams. But wait, there's more! Mr. Karen apparently didn't seem to mind powdered samosa, but instead asked smugly, "So how many samosas now?" 48, I claimed triumphantly. You see, sometime in the past, my uncle's old chef retired, and the new chef made samosas with a little bit more filling in them. They looked the same size on the outside and only weighed a couple grams more each. And since he made them in bulk and also sold to other shops in the area, the price wasn't too much of an issue. So my uncle let it slide. But those couple grams added up on mass orders. And that is what Mr. Karen found out the hard way. He looked sheepishly at the pre-packed samosas and then at his own package and asked if he could buy the former instead. "No, my nephew made a package specially for you at your own request. So that is what you have to buy," my uncle finally spoke. Mr. Karen silently took his pack, paid, and left. He was a lot more respectful during his subsequent visits. I was reminded of this story yesterday when my PS3 finally died. Now, I don't blame the guy for thinking, maybe they are trying to save a little bit of money. Maybe they do underfill it a little bit. But if you call him out on it, that's a gamble you're taking and it clearly did not pay off here. It clearly was a pretty good humbling experience either way for Mr. Karen. This next story is by Gasping Jill Franks. I adhered to the sickness policy to the letter. In the early 2000s, I worked in the UK for a huge American insurance company. I managed a team of 10 to 12 administrators. The job was dull, the people were mainly great, and it was a steady place to work. Now, with this being a US company, the benefits package was poor compared to most UK rivals. Things like paid annual leave and paid sickness were the statutory minimum it was legal to give in the UK. I had this guy join my team who I shall call Dan. Dan was about 22 or 23, a bit of a plodder, definitely just there until he could find something better, and I couldn't blame him. One Monday, when he'd been there about 3 months, he didn't show up one Monday morning. I was initially unconcerned, but when he hadn't called or shown up 45 minutes later, I started looking for his home phone number to check if he was okay. Right then, my phone rang, and it was Dan. He told me on the Friday night he had gone out with his friends and got really drunk. When he got home, he decided to deep fry some fries, on the stove. He fell asleep, and when he woke up, the pan was on fire on the stove, black smoke billowing everywhere. Now, I think I would have just run, but as he was pretty drunk, he decided to open the kitchen window in his apartment and throw the fiery pan outside. He managed to get boiling hot fat all over his dominant hand. Fat spilled all over and caught fire, so he ran and called the fire service. On his way out, he grabbed his wallet, coat, and 3 CDs. Along with the clothes he had on, this was all that survived. He was really upset and told me he had no insurance for his possessions. He was going to be off sick for some weeks. The doctors thought he might need a skin graft on his hand. I told him to leave things with me. I would sort stuff out at work and would call him later. I called our local HR team, who said there was very little they could do due to his length of service. He only had 6 paid sick days left. He'd already taken a few. I was shocked. I asked if we could bend the rules. No. Is there a fund we could donate something to him from? No. Feeling this was really mean, I called HR in our head office and got the same answers. Very shortly afterwards, I got a call from our local HR manager, Claire, who was usually nice with me. We were on some of the same staff committees together, but today she wanted to know why I had tried to go over her head, yada yada yada. She said that the sickness policy was clear and I had to follow it to the letter. Did I understand? You bet I did. Cue malicious compliance. I filled in all the paperwork to send to Claire, some of it authorizing the deduction of Dan's pay as he would exceed his sickness benefit that month. I think Claire was surprised I had rolled over so easily. I wasn't known for that. About an hour later, I sent her an email asking her to proofread a poster I had created to go on one of our committee notice boards. It was all about Dan and what had happened to him, and suggested the different ways teams could raise some money to help him out, as he had nothing and unfortunately wasn't entitled to any sick pay. I immediately got a "please don't progress this any further just now" email from Claire, and half an hour later or so, she called to let me know they were granting 3 months paid sickness leave initially and a goodwill payment of 5,000 British pounds on behalf of the company to help him get back on his feet. Dan was amazed that the magic I'd worked, and Claire was pretty frosty with me for about 6 weeks. The fact of the matter is, there is nothing more convincing to make someone bend the rules than a good old case of public awareness. The moment that word gets around that the company is so callous and uncaring and unwilling to do anything for this dude who just lost everything, it all of a sudden immediately becomes possible to help that person out. For the company to have a change of heart and say, "Oh, of course, we want to be compassionate and help our workers." And our final story of the day is by Squirrely. You sure you want all that paperwork? At the time of malicious compliance, I was a project manager for a smaller industrial construction company on the Gulf Coast. We were adding on to an existing chemical plant in multiple phases. The first phase of the project went well. The client rep was easy to get along with and was very reasonable. He reported to their project manager, but we almost never dealt with her. We would have weekly status meetings to discuss cost projection and forecasts, schedule updates, change orders, and requests for information, all of which always went well. Towards the end of the first phase, the client was bought and merged with another company. This wasn't a problem at first. We finished the first phase under budget, ahead of schedule, and was awarded the second phase. The new owner decided the previous project manager wasn't adequate and wanted her replaced. Pretty common practice when things like this happen. They want people they know and trust. This change also changed the representative we had built a relationship with. While funding was getting worked out for the second phase, at the request of the client, my company kept me and 3 of my direct reports on: project manager, me, cost controller, construction manager, and admin. We assisted with scope development, contract T's and C's, constructability reviews, material ordering, and general planning. After 2 months, the client gives us the green light to proceed, so we get to work. I'm not what's referred to as a change order artist in my industry. Unless it's a change of scope or an extreme unforeseeable or weather delay, I try to steer away from requesting more money as much as possible. Sometimes there's no avoiding it, especially when the scope of work is lacking, but we had ample opportunity to vet and assist in defining the project scope. And I had estimated we would have roughly 25 change orders. Some jobs are not so lucky. We had accounted for 30 minutes every morning for safety talks and work permits to be given to the crew foremans, which is pretty standard for this client and facility. First day takes 3 hours to get permits. I think it's just growing pains, new people, it'll improve. Second day, 3 hours. Third day, 4 hours. Day 4 is our first weekly meeting, and I bring this up with some draft test COs, RFIs, and reports to see how the new project manager wants to see our weekly data moving forward. We discussed the permitting issue, and I explained that I'm pretty flexible and believe in a give-and-take relationship, but I need help with permits if we're going to meet the project deadline and budgetary constraints. The project manager decides he wants change orders submitted weekly, in arrears 1 week to have real-time numbers. This goes well for a couple weeks. Permit issuance time went down and I fell into my give-and-take attitude. I wouldn't include every delay or change, believing this was the high road and trying to build a relationship. Then something happened. The project manager got weird. His whole attitude and demeanor changed. The project manager states he now wants change orders submitted every day, per discipline, per instance. I try to explain that we have 4 disciplines and that would be an enormous amount of unnecessary paperwork, and that I'd rather have a conversation about these as some of them will not be worth the paper they're written on. But he insists every deviation, every change, I want everything on paper and submitted daily for approval. All supporting documentation needs to be included. His attitude change clicked with me now. He thinks we won't be able to keep up with the mountain of paperwork. He even made it a point to amend our contract with this, stating if we didn't follow this, we would lose billing rights for extra work. Cue malicious compliance. I sit down with my cost controller, construction manager, and 8 foremen to explain what the client wants. Any scope change, permit delay, operations delay, or scaffold delay was to be radioed in immediately to the cost controller to request a new cost code to track hours. We would track any materials or equipment rentals to these respective codes as well. We would develop an estimate on the scope changes, and on the delays, we would provide actual hours and submit these requests at the end of each day. Once the work for the scope changes were completed, the original change order estimate would be actualized. The individual change orders would then be submitted as independent invoices at the end of the month, in addition to our normal scope invoices. This was not a large project at all, valued at around $8 million for 4 months of work and 100 construction personnel. When the project was all said and done, we had submitted roughly 800 change orders valued at $1.6 million. The project manager and his team would have to review 150 to 200 invoices a month, some of which were only $54 for a 15-minute delay. The cherry on top, the client now took too long to vet the invoices and wouldn't pay timely per the contract. Every month, the client had to pay an additional 3% due to late payment fees. Petty? It sure was, but I gave him exactly what he wanted. I ended up making my company and me a lot of money on that project. To be truthful, I don't understand what the motivations would be to create this mountain of work that they wouldn't be able to keep up with. Like maybe they could penalize you due to the contract, but to me it almost sounds like micromanaging or something. Maybe the goal is you can't keep up with it all, so the costs will go down because a lot of this stuff they think is getting reported won't get reported because you just can't keep up with it. All it did was end up costing way more money because they were on top of it. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.